bookmark it because it's maybe one of the only examples of me having to give credit to people I usually vehemently disagree with. You got Marco Rubio, you got Trump, and in this case, you also have Joe Scarborough. Piers Morgan, as he always does, had a big panel on his show today, and one of the panelists was actually an Israeli. You may have heard of him. His name's Gideon Levy. And if you know anything about him, you're probably familiar with the fact that Gideon Levy has been willing to be critical about the government of Israel or the Israeli Defense Forces and how they prosecute wars. And he's really a voice that I value, even though I don't always agree with him. When he was on Piers Morgan's show today, I think that he may have been the first Israeli that I heard calling it like he sees it, telling the truth about what's actually transpiring in Gaza as it relates to those humanitarian aid hubs and the dozens, sometimes hundreds of civilians who get shot and killed by the IDF as they are waiting in line, attempting to get access to flour or some humanitarian assistance so they and their families can maybe have a shot at staying alive. Now, with that in mind, take a listen to what Gideon Levy had to say here.
I must remind ourselves that when the UN's agencies distributed the aid, there were no killed people. It all started with this monster organization of putting 2-3 stations in the Gaza Strip for 2 million people, almost as an experiment in human being, in starving human beings. And then comes the question really about the figures. Oh, those propaganda people, they love to speak about figures. Aren't they 1,000 babies less than 1 year killed? No, they know it's only 700 babies killed. Hamas is exaggerating. And if it is 700 babies killed, can we live with it? None of them was killed in purpose, all of them by chance, all of them potential threat to the soldiers. How dare you to spread this propaganda knowing that you are lying? There is a daily massacre in Gaza now. Killing in the sake of killing, nothing but this. The last 2 weeks are horrible because you see the soldiers, you hear the machine guns, you see the people lying on the sand and trying to save themselves. How can you dare to invent all kinds of statistics instead of saying, yes, this is our army. The army got a command now to kill as many Palestinians as possible because that's our goal now. We don't have any other goal in Gaza now.
So that was a powerful moment on Piers Morgan's show today. The other individual that you see in the center of the screen who's kind of shaking his head in denial of what Gideon Levy is saying is a former IDF spokesperson. He was just, rotating the usual talking points that are meant to provide cover for Israel's genocide in Gaza. But Gideon Levy called it like he saw it or sees it. And we also know that there are 2 previous prime ministers of Israel who at first were supportive of what was going on in Gaza, but lately had no choice but to tell the truth about what's happening because everyone who's willing to be honest sees it. Everyone who's paying attention sees it. And the main reason why I wanted to show that moment featuring Gideon Levy, again, an Israeli who lives in Israel, is because oftentimes when you watch these types of debate shows, the Israeli is like Jonathan Conricus, right? The other former IDF spokesperson that I pretty much lost it on when I went on Piers Morgan's show on Monday of this week. And it's people who seem to care very little, if anything at all, about the humanity of Palestinian civilians. Normal people who are just trying to survive in one of the most atrocious, terrible situations you could ever imagine. Okay, they are living through absolute hell. And I think it's become very clear that the IDF's mission here is not about rooting out Hamas. It's about murdering people, killing people, and eventually whoever remains, displacing them. One other thing that I just want to note about the IDF spokesperson who was on the show. If you have time later today and you want to watch the entire episode of Piers Morgan's episode from today, you'll notice that the IDF spokesperson said that the civilian population of Gaza is 1.5 million. That's a little terrifying. It really is, because is that the civilian population? how many people have actually been killed in Gaza so far? Because at the beginning of this war, there were over 2 million people living in Gaza. In the beginning of this war, we heard that there was somewhat 30,000 Hamas militants, if that. So how did the IDF spokesperson reach the conclusion that there's only 1.5 million civilians living in Gaza? Is it because a higher number that we don't even know about have been slaughtered by the IDF? Are they just making up numbers in regard to how many Hamas militants are in Gaza? What kind of intel does the Israeli military have in regard to who's a Hamas militant? How do they decide whether they're gonna shoot and kill someone because they suspect that they're a Hamas militant? There's just a lot of weird, contradictory information coming out from the IDF and the Israeli government. You also have both Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump saying that there's 1.7 million Palestinians in Gaza right now. When again, the death toll is allegedly only 60,000. And in the beginning of this war, we kept hearing that the population of Gaza was over 2 million. So I don't know. I think that the death toll numbers that we're getting are undercounted significantly. Bodies that remain buried under the rubble have not been counted in the official death toll numbers. So I guess we're gonna have to wait and see just how many innocent people and civilians have been slaughtered as a result of this genocide that the Israeli military has carried out in the Gaza Strip. But if you pay attention to the various ministers, the various government officials within the government of Israel, they don't even hide it. That's the thing that drives me crazy. In the context of the United States, you get gaslit endlessly about how like, no, this isn't a genocide. No, they're not gonna do ethnic cleansing. While you have government officials flat out saying, we want ethnic cleansing. We wanna push whatever remaining Palestinians there are out of the Gaza Strip. We're taking over that land. By the way, we're also going to take over the West Bank, which was governed by a different governing body, not Hamas, but they wanted that land anyway. So they're gonna use what happened on October 7th to just take over both territories entirely, push Palestinians out, especially in the West Bank. I mean, settlers have been forcing Palestinians out of their rightful legal homes for many years now with impunity, with the IDF watching to provide cover, to provide protection for the settlers who have been stealing land, stealing homes from innocent Palestinian civilians who have the right to those homes and the right to that land. But going back to Gideon Levy, I know that you hear wall-to-wall propaganda from Israelis providing cover for the Israeli-led genocide in Gaza. But I don't want you to make the mistake of thinking that every Israeli believes in what the government is doing. They all love it. Yes, I've seen the polling that shows that the majority of Israelis are in favor of what's happening in Gaza. But I do question how much they really know. I do question whether or not they're watching the same videos that we're watching. And even so, there are also wonderful Israelis who have actually been protesting what's been going on in Gaza endlessly. And they put themselves at quite a bit of risk because they become targets for the Israeli government as well. So I commend Gideon Levy for speaking the truth on Piers Morgan's show. This isn't the first time he's done it. And I know that in our audience, we do not at all try to appeal to people who have hatred in their hearts based on someone's identity. But just in case, if anyone was ever under any impression that here at TYT, we support hatred toward Jewish people or toward Israeli civilians. Nah, I'm not about that. But when it comes to systems, when it comes to a government, when it comes to a military, we're talking about something entirely different, entirely different. And so as much as some of these bad faith actors try to smear critics of the Israeli government as so-called Jew haters, that is not true. You have to pay close attention to the words that come out of someone's mouth. If they're being specific about Israeli government policies or specific instances in which the IDF has behaved poorly, then they're obviously criticizing something specific and not the identity of the individuals involved. That's it. So thank you to Gideon Levy. It's about time we heard someone who's Israeli, go on Piers Morgan and actually tell the truth about what's going on. All right, with that said, I want to talk a little bit about really interesting leak that came out. And I think we should proceed with caution whenever there's leaked intel in regard to Iran, in regard to conflicts in the Middle East, especially when a lot of this intel in the past has gotten us into a lot of trouble. Now, with that in mind, let's get to the story.
The conversion facility, which you can't do a nuclear weapon without a conversion facility. We can't even find where it is, where it used to be on the map. You can't even find where it used to be because the whole thing is just blackened out. It's gone.
It's wiped out.
It's wiped out. Then we dropped 12 of the strongest bombs on the planet right down the hole in 2 places. Everything underneath that mountain is in bad shape.
When you talk to the people who built the bombs, understand what those bombs can do, and deliver those bombs, they landed precisely where they were supposed to, so it's a flawless mission.
Flawless. You would think they'd do the opposite. You would think they'd want to say, this was an unbelievable success. And the thing that hurts me is it's really demeaning to the pilots and the people that put that whole thing together, the generals. That was a perfect operation.
Moderate to severe, and we believe far more likely severe and obliterated. So this is a political motive here.
The Trump administration found itself defending the effectiveness of their bombing campaign against nuclear sites in Iran today, following a leak from the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency, which claims that the operation set back the Iranian government by just a few months, that it just wasn't as effective as previously thought. Now, I actually side with the administration officials here. I think that this preliminary report that was leaked by a Pentagon staffer should be looked upon with a great deal of skepticism. But with that in mind, let's hear more about what this leaked intel indicated.
Based on a battle damage assessment that was carried out by US Central Command, essentially looking at the images and looking at what was actually damaged, the Defense Intelligence Agency has assessed that the core components of Iran's nuclear program are largely intact, and that Iran's nuclear program has essentially only been set back by months. Now, we presented this information to the White House for comment, and White House Press Secretary Karen Levitt, she did acknowledge the existence of this assessment, but she said in a statement that the administration disagrees with it. She said, quote, "This alleged assessment is flat out wrong and was classified as top secret, but was still leaked to CNN by an anonymous low-level loser in the intelligence community."
Now, again, this preliminary report was leaked to CNN and also to the New York Times. And this report that was done by the Defense Intelligence Agency focused largely, according to the New York Times, on the state of the Fordo plant. And that's the country's deeply buried uranium enrichment facility, which produced the near bomb grade level enriched uranium. If you guys can remember, when we originally covered this story, Iran had managed to enrich uranium to 60%. You need to get it to 90% enrichment in order for it to be at the level necessary to build an atomic bomb or a nuclear weapon. But nonetheless, officials familiar with the intelligence report said that early findings, again, early findings, no one's been on the ground yet. So really, in order to know the extent of the damage to these nuclear facilities, we have to wait to see what happens after an international group goes to inspect the sites and determine just how bad the damage is. But nonetheless, officials familiar with the intelligence report said that early findings showed that the strikes had set back Iran's nuclear program by months. Officials said the strikes sealed off entrances to the facility, but had not led to a collapse, leaving open the possibility that Iran could eventually dig it out. So let's just pause for a second. Really, 30,000-pound bombs didn't cause any damage to the facility? Like, what are we talking about here? I remember prior to the Trump administration making the decision to drop the bombs, there was all this analysis done about whether or not the bombs would even be effective. And the bombs had recently been upgraded or updated in order to be effective for the Fordo facility because of how deeply buried that facility was. Now, let me give you some more of the intel as it pertains to this preliminary report. The reason Iran most likely could still race to a bomb relatively quickly, officials said, is that Iran likely retains much of the enriched uranium and likely has secret nuclear facilities in which to process it further. Now, likely doesn't tell me anything. Obviously, there's a lack of certainty here. Are there other facilities? How is it that we know about some of the facilities and we don't know about the other alleged facilities that might exist? The other thing that's really interesting to me here is, look, there is definitely some indication that they did take the 60% enriched uranium out of these facilities in order to put it in a safe place where they knew, these bombs would not damage them or be impacted by them. There's been some reporting on that seems credible. However, I don't know for sure yet. No one knows for sure yet. And that's really important to harp on here. But let's also talk about where Iran was in their alleged quest to build a nuclear weapon prior to the bombings. So again, you need 90% enriched uranium in order to build the bombs. They had enriched uranium up to 60%. They do not have, or there is no indication, and there was no intelligence to indicate that Iran had restarted the nuclear program, the nuclear weapons program that they had suspended all the way back in 2003. And that was the intel that was shared by Tulsi Gabbard, head of the DNI, Director of National Intelligence. So there was no indication that they had started building a weapon or that they had restarted their nuclear weapons program that was suspended back in 2003. The other thing is, it's one thing to build a nuclear weapon. You also need to have a mechanism in which you would deliver said nuclear weapon. They don't have that type of mechanism. There's no indication that they've worked on that type of mechanism. They were nowhere close to building a nuclear bomb before these bombings took place. Now, if you think 30,000-pound bombs didn't do damage to these facilities, especially after you see satellite imagery showing you the damage, you're falling for pro-war propaganda, if you ask me. That's my belief. I also think usually when a staffer at the Pentagon leaks preliminary intel, there's a motive behind it. You really have to ask yourself, what is the motive here? Because remember, as we know, this war in Iran, the war that Israel was trying to goad the United States into, really didn't have anything to do with nuclear weapons. The narrative switched to regime change war real quick. And as we also know, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel has been warning about Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon in weeks, until he was interviewed by Bret Baier last week and admitted that building a nuclear weapon was maybe a year to 3 years away. Okay. Look, I don't think it was about the nuclear weapon. That's why we kept hearing about a regime change war. And now it appears that a regime change war is not on the horizon. And oh, wow, suddenly there's preliminary intel being leaked from the Pentagon. The same federal government entity that can't pass a single audit. Okay, the government entity that hasn't seen a war it doesn't love. So just something to keep in mind. Now, Israel produced their own intelligence, and I'll do it with scare quotes, intelligence that, of course, mirrors this preliminary report that was leaked to CNN and the New York Times. I think it should be ignored. They have a serious conflict of interest here. Obviously, they want to go to war with Iran specifically to change the regime there. They want the Ayatollah gone, either by assassination or other means, and they want to essentially install the son of the Shah that was exiled from Iran during the revolution in the late 1970s.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.